What is the state of freedom both in South Africa and around the world? And how does the level of freedom in a society determine prosperity and human flourishing? Well, we at the Free Market Foundation are delighted to be partnering with the Fraser Institute in Canada for the release of this year's Economic Freedom of the World Index. It is a measure of the state of economic freedom around the world. And I'm delighted to be joined by Neil Emerick, who is a longtime friend, associate, and also now deputy chair of the Free Market Foundation. Neil, thanks very much for joining us.
No, thank you, David.
So now, Neil, you've been involved with the EFW since the early 2000s, so you're very familiar with the methodology and also the significance of this global measure of freedom around the world. Can you tell us a little bit of background just about the methodology, how it's structured, and also why this is a significant annual report?
Right, yes. Well, it's a 30-year-old study now, and it kind of answers the question, or attempts to answer the question, whether a belief in free markets and property rights brings more benefits than, say, a highly interventionist government. So one of the challenges for the institutes, the Fraser Institute being the author of this index, was how to come up with a decent measurement of what freedom was constituted, or how it was constituted. So the index itself is an attempt to measure various things on an ideological scale, and then to use that in economic studies where you correlate the freedom score against things you're interested in. So those would be economic outcomes such as wealth and income, health, environment, longevity, that sort of thing. And over the 30 years, the index has become a foundation for these sort of econometric studies where markets are compared with the interventions of government.
Okay, and then maybe let's delve in. So there are 5 categories with which the index is composed. It's a composite index, so it draws on data sets from various sources. So maybe, you could just give us some idea of what is covered. How do they define liberty? What is the scoring system?
That's right. Okay, so it was quite a challenge for them. Obviously, they sort of had to decide where to get the data. That's the first job of any statistician. So the report itself is really a report of reports, as you mentioned. So we draw on data sets like the World Bank Development Indicators. We can use national statistics that come from the governments themselves. We work with 165 jurisdictions. These are the democracies of the world. So we don't get data from the sort of North Koreans and so on. But of the 165 democracies, we get reasonably good data each year. This is compiled from or consolidated into 5 specific areas, which tell their own stories. And then the 5 areas are consolidated up into a single index, which is often used then for the studies. The 5 areas, interesting, are the size of government. So to what degree does a government tax you? If they were to tax you 100%, you'd be a slave, right? But obviously 0 is not an option we see in the world. But the more tax, the less choice the consumer has. So that's an interesting or sort of relevant parameter for freedom. We have the second category, which is the rule of law and property rights and private property protection. So we're looking at the courts, we're looking at how well they enforce contracts, we are looking at the policing system and how law is enforced. That's a very, very interesting area and particularly of interest to South Africa. The third category is sound money, where we look to see where a government has been inflating its currency away. What is the scale of inflation? What is the variability? If it changes a lot every year, it's difficult for businesses to plan. So that's an important element. The fourth category is the freedom to trade. And there we're looking to see whether a country allows high levels of import and export. That increases the size of your market that your businesses can trade with. So the easier that is, the less friction, the better that is. And the last category is a broad category. It's made up of 3 other components. It's on regulation. So we're interested in how much regulation is there for businesses around labor, hiring and firing, for credit, how highly regulated is the banking industry, and then business more broadly. So how much red tape is there in the economy.
Okay, and our audience might be familiar with some of these themes because this actually forms part of the Free Market Foundation's Liberty First series, which is a project that we've been running since 2024, which takes these different categories, looks at South Africa's ranking within the EFW, and charts a series of policy recommendations for how to enhance economic freedom in South Africa and help South Africa to move up those rankings. So we'll be doing a bit of a reveal later on about South Africa's position in the index.
We've made the case that the statistics itself represent one axis, if you like, of a correlation, and then we're interested in any other statistic that we might sort of want to explore and see if free markets are lead to benefits there. So there are some sort of nice generalized categories that the report shows each year, and the way they present that is to show the data in quartiles. So they'll take the top 25%, and we call those the free countries, and then there'll be the less free countries, all the way down to the bottom 25%, which I'll label the unfree countries. And I think the message that we want to deliver first and foremost is that free markets bring benefits. I mean, that's obviously the name of our foundation and what's written on the tin. But that is really the main point that we're trying to get across, which is that where governments allow their consumers and businesses to have choices, they tend to flourish. And there's over 1,000 papers now that have used the index to explore statistics where the freedom index is plotted against one axis, and then we're obviously interested in whether there's more or less of a good thing on the other axis. And just to run through a few, but of the 165 countries, those in that top 25% typically earn $55,000 a year as an income level, which is obviously fantastic. Where the bottom 25% only earn $7,000 a year, so it's something like 7 times difference in income between the free countries and the unfree countries. And then a very important statistic is what are the poorest 10% in those quartiles earn? Well, if you're in the free country quartile, the poorest 10% earns $7,500 a year, which is not a great income, but in the scheme of the world's salaries, that's not too bad. $7,500 a year, whereas the poorest 10% in the bottom quartile earn under $1,000 a year. So again, we see that sort of 7 times difference between the unfree countries and the top free countries.
I think that's really important because a lot of critics of free market capitalism will say, oh, well, capitalism only really benefits the wealthy, people who already hold capital, but the rising tide really does lift all boats. And so you might have levels of inequality within a society, but in this top quartile, you're still getting overall living standards, quality of life improving, even for people who are at the bottom. And that ability to improve your circumstances is really critical for overall economic prosperity.
And the poor people know it. If you have 2 countries, and there have been papers on this, 2 countries living next to each other, have a border, that are free or unfree, ask the poor people, or witness the poor people and which direction they travel in. They're always crossing from the unfree to the free. So, judge people by their actions. So they know where they're better off. What is also interesting is that there's a tendency to believe that the free countries, the sort of capitalist countries, will have higher levels of inequality. And that's not borne out by the statistics. So there are other factors at play that would determine whether inequality is a problem for society. But one of the numbers that we've got here is that the percentage of income earned by the poorest 10% is about 3% across all countries. So in other words, the bottom 10% tend to take 3% of the income, irrespective of the government policies that you choose. So the issue then is, if you're going to be poor, where do you want to be poor? And the answer would be clearly in a freer country. And so to continue with a couple of other good ones that are not economic necessarily, but you can expect to live 16 years longer if you live in a free country, which is obviously reflecting the better healthcare and so on. Infants are 9 times less likely to die. Children are 2.5 times less likely to work than in unfree countries. Literacy is universal in free countries, but it's only 78% of girls aged 15 to 24 are literate in unfree countries. We score better, 50% better on environmental health than unfree countries. Tolerance is higher in freer countries where there are better attitudes towards minorities and immigrants. And also, and particularly relevant to South Africa, governments in free countries score 2.5 times less corruption than those in unfree countries. So where governments are smaller and have less say, or in terms of things like licensing or whatever, where they have less discretionary power, there will always be less corruption, which is obviously a positive.
Yeah, and many people, I think, see corruption as some kind of aberration. But the more you increase the size and scope of government, the more you create opportunities for rent-seeking kind of behavior, for people to lobby for influence over the government rather than compete in an open market. So there's a bit of a negative cycle there when you have a very large government system.
I can say overall, the index this year has thankfully ticked up. If we take all the countries and push them together, we can see that freedom is returning globally. We took a hit during the COVID period, which stretched from 2020 to 21-22. This report works from the 2023 numbers that we can gather from all these national reports globally. And the good news is that the world freedom is continuing its trend again after a significant dip during the COVID period, which obviously impacted on all manner of freedoms, global travel, business restrictions, and so on. This was obviously a significant hit in history. Unfortunately, the overall score is not back yet to where it was. We've only recovered back to where we were in 2015. So world freedom is only back to where it was 10 years ago, but at least it's turned around and gone back in the right direction. So if you're happy, I can give you the results now. Are you happy to proceed?
Yeah, let's have the big reveal.
Let's do it. So here we go again. So there are no surprises again. The top two countries are Hong Kong and Singapore. They've been there since the index was started. They're significantly freer than any other country in the world. So they retain their top two places. But making up the rest of the top 10, we have the same usual suspects. It's New Zealand, Switzerland, the United States, and then we have Ireland, Australia, Taiwan, Denmark, and the Netherlands making up the top 10. And then the laggards, if you like, the bottom 10 from the bottom up. Venezuela is the most unfree country in the world, followed by Zimbabwe, Sudan, Algeria, Iran, Myanmar, Argentina, unfortunately, not picking up as fast as we would like, despite their new president. Syria, Libya, and Chad. So you can get a sense of which way the index skews from that top 10 and bottom 10. And the reveal this year is that South Africa has maintained its place of 83rd. So we haven't moved in the rankings at all. We are in the same place that we were last year. And to give you a sniff test of the sort of countries around the world and where they sit, so you'd find the UK is in 13th, Japan is in 17th. We're pleased to see Mauritius, the highest ranked African country, is 21st. Your France's and Italy's, they're in 44th. Remember, this is out of 165. Gambia, Botswana, they're 69. Uganda, Kenya, 70s, 80s. India is 86th. Brazil is 87th. That's part of the BRICS group there that we can talk about. Tanzania is 102nd. Zambia, Mozambique, 105th. Nigeria is 123rd. And Ukraine and Russia are sort of at the bottom there, 140. So that kind of gives you a scale, if you can imagine those countries and where they've figured on the historical, on the sort of political stage worldwide, you can kind of get a sense of where they are. A lot of the Eastern European countries in that sort of 30, 40 ranking bracket. Africa, unfortunately, is very much in the bottom half. So you're sort of in the 70s, 80s, and 120s. And then you have your problematic cases like your Venezuelas and your Argentinas and Zimbabwe's that obviously make up the bottom of the ranking. And where there are wars, of course. Wars are never good for economic freedom. Any country in a war obviously sees its ranking drop quite considerably. So if we focus on South Africa for a little bit, overall our freedom has moved down in the last 15 years. So since the early 2000s and the Mbeki period, we've moved from the mid 50 rankings into our current position, which is sort of the mid 80s, which puts us smack bang in the average of the global collection. Our score this year ticked up marginally, even though our ranking stayed the same. Like most countries, certain freedoms were returned. So our score goes marginally up from 6.6 to 6.61. It's a score out of 10. And we actually increased our scores in all areas except Area 2, the law and order, and Area 5, which was the general business regulation. We took a slight dip in judicial independence as a parameter and the efficiency of the legal system. So there was a slight downtick there. Also in strength and the impartiality of the courts also went down. And in the credit section, Area 5, government debt increased relative to private debt. So the government took a little bit more of the economy than the private sector, and that gives us a slightly lower score. If you're happy, I can just go through some of the individual parameters in the different areas, and it'll give you a sense of where South Africa sits and perhaps the areas where we've got most opportunities to improve. So Area 1 is the size of government, and in the last 5 years, we've dropped from 87th to 117th. So in that one category, we do quite poorly. I mean, we're down in the hundreds. So government consumption as a percentage of the GDP or the economy as a whole, we're 106th out of 165. Government investment has continued to fall, and we have low rankings there. We're 125th. We also have very high, relative to other countries, top marginal tax rates. So we don't encourage our high earners to stay in South Africa. We're 128th in the world in terms of the marginal tax rates. Then we move on to Area 2, which is the legal systems and private property rights you raised earlier. And generally speaking, this is our best category. We're kind of in the late 50s, early 60 rankings. The respect for our judiciary remains relatively high. They are impartial and relatively strong. So we score in the 30s to 50s in that parameter section. Our independence and the reliability of the court system is pretty good. Unfortunately, there's two aspects to it. There's the court system where orders are issued, but then there's the law and order aspect. So to what degree can we rely on the police to look after private property and protect us from crime? And we don't do so well there. In the law and order category, we ranked 102nd in that section. We move on to Area 3, which is the inflation category. And South Africa has actually had high inflation. Anything above sort of 4 or 5% has been very, very high, globally speaking. So we were in the sort of mid-80s ranking. And that, fortunately, has been falling quite well. Not only has the inflation number been falling, but the variability has fallen. It's not sort of up and down, making it hard to plan. So we've done quite well there. We still have high levels of capital controls. That's one of the parameters. So I think there are 13 parameters that the World Bank tracks in terms of the restrictions that you have on your money and your ability to transfer it and keep overseas bank accounts, for example, which gives you an option of opting out of your own currency if your government decides to abuse it. And we're still very, very poor on capital controls. South Africans have a lot of restrictions on their ability to move their money around and take it overseas. So we're 103rd there. Good news is we've taken the number one spot for one parameter this year, and that is that inflation variability number. So over the past 5 years now, we've upped that score to 9.7, which put us on the number one spot. So that's very, very good.
I think that's very important, especially in the context where some people are questioning Reserve Bank independence and the moves, for example, like from the economic freedom fighters to nationalize the Reserve Bank. That's really, you don't want to mess with your monetary system. Inflation can be absolutely ruinous to an economy more broadly, but also to people's lives and their livelihoods. So I think that's something that we must very jealously guard.
Absolutely. I mean, as a policy, we mustn't underestimate the damage that corruption of the currency can have. And the difference between 3% inflation and 6-7% inflation is massive. I think at 3%, you want lower, you want zero ideally. You can kind of sort of deal with that and so on. But when it gets to 7, 8, 9%, then all kinds of distortion starts taking place in the economy. So we should give our governor 100% support for his argument that targeting lower inflation constantly is a top priority. I absolutely support his recent announcements. Moving on, then we come to freedom to trade, which is a good one. So, to what degree can your businesses exchange products with overseas, importing and exporting? We generally score in the mid 70s to upper 90s, or sorry, we've gone from the mid 70s to upper 90s. So, we've actually increased trade restrictions. That's principally come about because our government, although it doesn't implement a lot of tariffs very positively, it does try to pick winners. So where it does put tariffs in, it tries to protect certain industries and obviously restricts consumers' abilities to buy cheaper stuff from overseas, which has knock-on effects. I mean, we often talk about beneficiation, and we mention beneficiation of our own minerals, but of course we can beneficiate other products that we can import. We can bring things in and add value and export again. And of course, if you put tariffs or any kind of other taxes in place, you make that sort of process harder. So we're very much average in terms of our taxes on international trade. We're a hundredth, so slightly below average. Our regulatory trade barriers also put us at a hundredth. Foreign ownership of companies, we're a hundredth. Capital controls, we've mentioned, 121. Visa requirements for visiting foreigners, we're 99th, but we've done some good work recently with the digital nomad visas and a little bit of opening up there, which is very, very positive. We score very, very well on the protection of foreign assets. So we have treaties in place with overseas countries that use our courts to protect those assets, and that's quite strong and well represented. And the index picks that up and gives us good credit. And then finally, in the Area 5 section, which is the regulation category, we do reasonably well. We unfortunately, again, the progression has not been good. In the last sort of 10 years, we've gone from the mid 30s into the 80s, which is average. On private banking, we score number one again. We've always been consistently very good. South Africa has a top banking industry, very, very diverse and very competitive. So it's done very, very well there. And the government tends to stay out of banking. It doesn't regulate interest rates or controls or accounts too much. Pretty much we have a very, very competitive banking industry. Where we don't do so well is the government borrowing relative to the private sector borrowing. So the government does make its presence felt in the credit markets. The labour statistics are where we do particularly poorly. So the hiring and firing numbers, which we get from the Global Competitiveness Report, we're 123rd ranking. We have restrictions on work practices where we're 141st. We have restrictions on foreign labour, 117th, and administrative requirements were 112th. So we've good mix of good and bad. Market openness, we score quite well. Overall distortion of the business environment, 115th. So we're quite a red tapey environment. We're in the bottom third quartile for that sort of last category of regulation. We've obviously got a lot of work we could do there.
Right, Neil. Well, maybe we can conclude this discussion by just providing us and our audience with an overview of where do you think South Africa stands? I mean, you said that we've kind of been middling in terms of the global rankings, but what is your overall assessment of our performance here on the Economic Freedom of the World Index?
Oh, well, actually, somebody's talking about this last night with some friends. One person said to me, if nothing changes, everything stays the same. And I thought it was most apt because we've been 83rd in the rankings for a couple of years now. And I think it's particularly relevant if we're not moving in either direction, we should expect things to stay the same. And unfortunately, that means high levels of unemployment, poverty continuing the way it is, business struggling, not wanting to invest, and so on. So if we don't do something, then we can just expect things to stay the same, which is not good. I think one theme that I'd like to bring out this year, which is that I've been, this index necessarily always makes you think about it, but is this sort of scale between capitalism and socialism. And we often tend to think of countries as being either capitalist or either socialist, but I don't think that's fair. And I think if we look at the battlegrounds where South Africa's policies are being fought, what we see are there many, many different areas where there are scales of capitalism and socialism. And South Africa has many, many elements where we have free markets and excellent private property rights defended by the courts, and things work very well. I mean, if you consider South Africa as an African country, we're exceptional. We have excellent roads, and we have excellent supermarkets, and there's no shortages in the shelves. But there are other areas of our economy which have been socialized. They're publicly owned. So we would look at areas like electricity. And we know over the last 10 years where the government's run the electricity market, we've had shortages and lack of investment, and our lights have been going off. We see nationalisation in the petroleum industry again. We had private property rights in minerals and water, and yet in the early 2000s, they were taken over to public ownership or custodial rights. And you could, whether we've had such reduced investment in the mining industry, you could argue stemmed from there. Land rights are a big issue. We have a lot of private freehold, and there's a robust private property market in South Africa, but not for everybody. A lot of people live on trust land, or where the government has expropriated private property and given it out for land reform. They haven't given out free title to the new owners or to the new tenants. They have made them tenants on a leasehold. So some people experience all the benefits of private markets and choices, and yet the government takes particular areas and socializes it, and necessarily we see the results. So railways would be another example. And of course, the big one that scares everybody right now is healthcare, where we have a vibrant private healthcare system. And there's many, many options in terms of how we can extend that to everybody in the marketplace. But instead, the government is choosing to go down a route where we socialize healthcare completely. So I think that's very dangerous. We need to fight these battles across all the different policy areas, and the index itself is helpful to you and me, David. We can use this to sort of highlight which areas we do well in and where we feel we can improve. Overall, I can say that South Africa is a average economy. It's an average size economy. It has an average level of freedom, but of course, averages never tell the full story. We have parameters where we do exceptionally well, and South Africa is an excellent place to be and have great choices. And there are people and sections of society that, of course, live and are highly dependent on government, and necessarily they have limited choices, poor service, or non-delivery of service. And those are the areas we need to look at.
Yeah, so my assessment of this is that South Africa's freedom, the state of freedom in this country, is uneven. And where markets have been able to operate unfettered, or the profit motive and private incentives are in play, then we see flourishing. We see dynamism, like you mentioned, the private healthcare sector, the banking sector was another one that came up. So, we must trust that people can generate prosperity and flourishing if left to their own devices, if we keep the size of the government small, if we secure private property rights, if we open up to international trade. These are the ingredients for how countries develop and how people can improve their circumstances. So, Neil, Emerick, I wanted to thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. And I would also encourage our audience to visit freetheworld.org. The Free Market Foundation is a co-publisher of the Economic Freedom of the World Index together with the Fraser Institute. You can also go and check out libertyfirst.co.za. We'll put links to both of those websites in the description. Liberty First is, of course, the FMF's policy agenda based on the EFW framework and our recommendations for the government to really unleash the latent potential that economic freedom offers. So, Neil, thank you very much for your time today. And thanks very much for sharing your insights.
Thank you. Let's hope this is the year of change, and that we can see some of the things that the government has wanted to do, that they bring them to the fore. We live in hope.